Chapter 27. Old Huang spat out the grass root and said, "Not fighting anymore?" The old man said arrogantly, "What's the hurry? You'll get to fight later." Old Huang carried the sword case on his back and said flatly, "Forget it if you don't want to fight. I'm going to the Martial Emperor city to get the yellow cottage back." The old man was shocked. "Really?" Old Huang nodded. The old man sighed and shook his head with a bitter smile. "Then I won't fight anymore. It's a waste of my energy." Su Fengnian was confused. He arranged the huge old man Yuan Zuozong, who was more than 9 feet tall, to stay in a yard. Su Fengnian went to the stable. Old Huang was carrying the sword case and a cloth bag. He was chatting with the date-red horse as if he was saying goodbye. Su Fengnian was surprised. "Old Huang, what's going on?" The old groom said softly, "I've been watching Chu Kuang-nu at the bottom of the lake all these years. Since he's been released by the young master, there's nothing for me to do. I was defeated by the old monster Wang Xianji and left the yellow cottage sword in the Martial Emperor city. I couldn't let it go these years and wanted to get it back." Su Fengnian said bitterly, "Is it the giant sword stuck in the wall of the Martial Emperor city? The yellow cottage, that ranks 4th in the top 10 famous swords?" Old Huang smiled and nodded. The Martial Emperor city was located at the edge of the Eastern Sea. The city was built with stones to watch the sea. Wang Xianji was almost 100 years old, but he had been famous for 80 years. He was a martial arts genius that only appeared once in 100 years. He was famous for not carrying any weapons when he was young. He always fought with one hand. At 25, he was promoted to the ranks of the Peerless Masters. At 40, he challenged the sword god Li Chungang and broke the wooden ox and horse that could cut iron like mud with 2 fingers. He was famous all of a sudden. Wang Xianji obviously had the qualifications to be the first in the world, but he claimed to be the second. This made the top 10 masters in the Wulin Jianghu ranked 11th. The first place had been vacant for 20 years. In the past 50 years, there were 2 peerless masters who used swords. The new sword god Dong Tai held a peach branch and fought with Wang Xianji 3 times. He neither won nor lost. He was ranked 3rd in the top 10 masters. The other one was elusive. People only knew that he was from Western Shu. He was a nameless swordsman. After 30 years of swordsmanship, he comprehended the way of the sword and traveled Jianghu alone. He collected all the famous swords in the world and put them into his sword box. The world only knew that he fought with someone and became famous. Although he lost and left a sword on the city wall, no one doubted that this mysterious swordsman did not lose honorably because he lost to the old and strong Martial Emperor city's master Wang Xianji. Who would have thought that such a swordsman who could shake 40 provinces with one sword was a coachman in Bailiang Palace? He talked and chatted with horses all day long. At most, he would ask His Royal Highness for a pot of yellow wine to satisfy his cravings. Therefore, when the old man heard that 9th brother Huang had returned to the Martial Emperor city to challenge Wang Xianji, he knew that he could not beat him 10 years ago. Su Fengnian, who was holding a cucumber, smiled bitterly and said, "Old Huang, tell me, how many swords are in this sword box? Everyone in the world is guessing." Old Huang, who had a few stalks of horse grass stuck to his head after lying in the stable for a while, scratched his head and said, "There are 3 levels and 6 compartments in the sword box. Originally, there were 6 of the 10 famous swords in the world, but now there are only 5. Su Fengnian was speechless. "Old Huang, you're an expert. Can you be any better?" Old Huang said naively, "If young master wants to play with swords, I'll leave 3 or 4 for you." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "No, I'd rather you carry 180 swords and stab that Wang Xianji into a hornet's nest. Then, when you go out to flirt with the heroines of Jianghu, I'll be proud to say that I stole chickens and ducks with you, Old Huang. Isn't that right, Old Huang?" Old Huang grinned foolishly. Old Huang, who had no front teeth, was so cute. How could it be the 9th saber, who was thousands of miles above an expert? Su Fengnian could not figure it out, so he decided not to think about it anymore. He asked the servants to prepare a pot of Dragon Cliff sunken vat yellow wine and brought an inferior horse over. Su Fengnian personally held the reins and sent them off to the outside of the prince's mansion. He even stuffed a few banknotes of small denominations into Old Huang's hands. Old Huang did not refuse and said, "Young master, please go back. I know the way." Su Fengnian did not agree and said, "At least send it to the city gate, right?" The horse was an inferior horse. It was not that His Royal Highness was stingy, but whether it was the multicolored horse that had its mane cut into petals to look like celestial objects or the rarer and more precious Vergana horse, they did not conform to the principle of not being a fat sheep when going out. Moreover, old Huang probably would not really ride a horse. Su Fengnian was just finding him a companion to talk to. The banknotes of 500 to 600 taels were for old Huang to buy wine to drink. Old Huang loved yellow wine. It was not known whether it was because his surname was Huang that he liked to drink it, or because he loved yellow wine that his surname was Huang. Old Huang always had some sort of secret on him. However, in Su Fengnian's eyes, old Huang was just the old coachman who carried him forward with difficulty. Huang Jianjiu was secondary. These were his thoughts, but he did not dare to say them out loud for fear of appearing pretentious. From Bailiang Palace to Lingzhou's main city gate, there was an end no matter how far it was. The captain of the city gate saw His Royal Highness's heavy expression, and did not dare to go forward to flatter him. He only hurriedly chased everyone who was queuing up to leave the city to the side, making way for the empty city gate. Su Fengnian, who was leading the horse for old Huang, stood under the wall of the inner city gate. He passed the reins to the old coachman and said sentimentally, "We'll stop here, I won't send you off. Old Huang, is it boring to interact with a wastrel like me, a frog at the bottom of a well?" Old Huang shook his head and stared at His Royal Highness's young and handsome face. He chuckled and said, "It's very interesting. Really, old Huang doesn't know how to flatter. Doesn't young master often say that I speak honestly?" Su Fengnian smiled faintly. Old Huang took out a stack of silk and used charcoal to draw sword forms. There were not many words on each piece, only 2. From sword 1, sword 2, to sword 9. They were crooked like earthworms crawling on mud. He passed it to Su Fengnian and said, "Young master, keep it. In the future, if you see a child with spiritual energy, help me take him in as a disciple. It's more appropriate to snatch a virgin on the streets." Su Fengnian carefully kept it. Old Huang thought for a moment and said with a troubled expression, "Young master, old Huang is not cultured. I don't know how to name my sword. I only know 9 moves. From sword 1 to sword 9, the first 8 moves have been named by the people of the Jianghu on their own. I feel uncomfortable when I hear them. Young master, can you think of one for me?" Su Fengnian did not know whether to laugh or cry. He thought seriously for a moment and said, "The two of us walked 6,000 miles and you call it 6,000 miles? If you don't think it's vulgar and not imposing, you can use this." Old Huang gave him a thumbs up and praised, "It's imposing. When I reach Martial Emperor City, I'll tell you this amazing sword name. Maybe even Wang Xianji will be jealous." In the end, old Huang still led the horse and left with the pot hanging from his waist. Su Fengnian climbed up the wall and looked at old Huang's lonely figure. He shouted at the top of his voice, "Old Huang, if you want to drink rice wine on the way and you can't afford it after spending all your money, just come back. I'll save it for you." The old servant stopped and turned around. He took a deep look at Su Fengnian and shouted their common catchphrase, "Run when the wind blows." Then, he ran away in a funny, cute, and silly manner. Sword 9. 6,000 miles.